I got a transition. I wasn't going to bring this up, but I saw it and then I read the article. And to be quite honest with you, I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted with Sue Bird.
Drama is once again surrounding the WNBA as shocking headlines emerge about unbelievably low ticket prices, in some cases dropping to just $5. At the center of this growing storm is rising superstar Caitlin Clark, whose bold and fearless comments left fans buzzing after she seemed to mock legendary icon Sue Bird in response to the ticket price collapse. What began as a casual debate about the league's true value has now spiraled into a heated battle of generations, egos, pride, and respect. But the real question remains: why did Caitlin choose to fire this shot? This explosive clash has completely shaken the entire WNBA world. The firestorm didn't ignite on the court, but instead inside the high-pressure atmosphere of ESPN's studio. What was expected to be just another lively sports debate quickly transformed into something far greater, a clash that felt like a battle for the very soul of women's basketball. On one side of the table sat Sue Bird, a legendary name that barely needs an introduction. Four-time WNBA champion, Olympic gold medalist, and a living icon whose words carry unmatched weight. Facing her was Stephen A. Smith, the boldest and most unapologetic voice in sports media. Famous for his fiery opinions, sharp delivery, and fearless approach, he's a man who thrives on heated controversy while insisting on telling things exactly as he sees them. And this time, the burning subject up for debate was none other than the WNBA playoffs. Hovering over the heated debate like a storm waiting to break was one name neither side could possibly ignore: Caitlin Clark. Even though her team had already been knocked out, her presence, or more accurately, her glaring absence, loomed heavily in the studio air. Stephen A. Smith didn't tiptoe around the subject. He did exactly what his millions of loyal viewers expect him to do. He didn't soften the truth, didn't sugarcoat the reality, and certainly didn't disguise the brutal numbers. Instead, he slammed them straight on the table. With Clark gone from the playoffs, the stats painted a devastating picture. Ratings hadn't simply dipped, they had plummeted like a rock crashing into deep water. And Stephen A. wasn't spinning a story, he was reciting cold, merciless data straight from the scoreboard. But to Sue Bird, those numbers cut like betrayal. She didn't hear objectivity. She heard someone dismantling the very league she had spent her entire life building. Her frustration finally boiled over. To her, this wasn't neutral analysis, it was outright disloyalty. In a fiery response, she lashed back at Stephen A., accusing him of tearing apart the very product ESPN itself had heavily invested in. Sue Bird fired back with passion, questioning how a network partner could dedicate precious airtime to exposing the league's flaws instead of highlighting its strengths and successes. But Stephen A. didn't flinch for even a second. His response was swift, razor-sharp, and almost surgical in its delivery. Should he lie to his audience? Should he craft a feel-good fairy tale when the harsh reality was staring everyone directly in the face? The exchange sent shockwaves through the studio, creating a thick, electric tension that instantly silenced even the loudest voices on set. This wasn't merely a dispute about basketball, it was something much deeper. A raw collision between honest journalism and polished public relations, between harsh reality and carefully constructed image-making. And for the first time, the league's long-whispered insecurities weren't just hidden behind closed doors. They were laid bare, broadcast live to millions of viewers. Sue Bird's emotional plea revealed something far deeper than just frustration. The WNBA establishment wasn't simply chasing growth. It was clinging to a carefully polished, untouchable image. But Stephen A. Smith tore that illusion wide open. The league didn't truly want hard analysis. What they wanted was protection. And in that fiery moment, the mask finally slipped. Looming behind this clash was the unstoppable Caitlin Clark phenomenon, a force so powerful it had shaken the sports world in ways no one could ignore. Throughout the regular season, her games averaged nearly 1.7 million viewers, a jaw-dropping surge of more than 240% compared to the year before. Some of those broadcasts even outperformed primetime MLB and NHL games, a comparison that once seemed unthinkable. Clark wasn't just another rising star. She was rewriting the very limits of what women's basketball could become. The evidence wasn't just in the ratings, it was in the arenas. Her games sold out months in advance, not only in Indiana, but in cities all across America. Places that once struggled to fill half their seats suddenly found themselves at full capacity, with fans lining up outside just to catch a fleeting glimpse of her electrifying presence on the court. The Indiana Fever, Caitlin Clark's team, experienced an attendance explosion that no marketing budget on earth could have manufactured, averaging more than 13,000 fans per game. It was a surge fueled entirely by her presence. But once the playoffs began and Clark's team was knocked out, that miracle story twisted into a nightmare almost overnight. Suddenly, the ticket market collapsed. At Minnesota's Target Center, seats were selling for barely $10, and shockingly, even the WNBA Finals, the supposed crown jewel of the season, saw resale tickets going for as little as $9. That wasn't just a price cut. It was a desperate fire sale, a last-ditch attempt to disguise empty rows in arenas that only months earlier had been overflowing with Clark's magnetism. The TV ratings told the exact same brutal story. Without Caitlin on the stage, viewership cratered by nearly 70%. Even games featuring the league's most decorated stars barely managed to draw a fraction of the audience that Clark alone commanded. The numbers screamed louder than any debate ever could. Fans weren't truly flocking to the WNBA, they were flocking to Caitlin Clark. And when she disappeared, so did the crowds. For Sue Bird, those cold statistics weren't the entire story. She pushed back, arguing that Clark's playoff impact was being exaggerated, reminding everyone that Indiana never even hosted a postseason game because of their early elimination. From her perspective, Clark hadn't single-handedly carried the playoffs the way critics and fans were claiming. To Sue, this was never just about one rookie phenom. It was about the bigger picture of a league that deserved respect, patience, and unwavering support. But Stephen A. Smith wasn't moved. He stood firm, pointing directly at the hard reality. To him, the numbers weren't biased, nor were they an attack. They were undeniable proof that Caitlin Clark was the driving engine behind the WNBA's surge, and without her, the entire machine screeched to a halt. That's what transformed this exchange from a fiery on-air debate into something much larger, a raw public struggle over truth, loyalty, and the very identity of the WNBA itself. But here's the real question. What does this explosive clash between Sue Bird and Stephen A. Smith actually mean for the league's future? And could it be exposing a hidden power struggle the fans were never supposed to see? Stay tuned, because this confrontation might just shatter everything you thought you knew about the WNBA. What the fiery showdown between Sue Bird and Stephen A. Smith really revealed wasn't just a heated TV spat. It was the eruption of a deeper tension that had been simmering inside the WNBA all season long. Beneath the surface, whispers of resistance, jealousy, and bruised pride were already brewing among some of the league's most respected veterans. And right in the middle of it all stood Caitlin Clark, the rookie sensation who had already become the undeniable face of women's basketball. In truth, the resistance had begun long before Clark even stepped onto a WNBA court. Diana Taurasi, widely celebrated as perhaps the greatest player in league history, set the tone with a chilling statement. Reality is coming. On the surface, it sounded like a veteran offering wisdom to a young star. But to many fans, it carried something darker, a warning laced with menace. A promise that Clark's historic college dominance meant nothing in the professional ranks, and that the league's veterans were lying in wait, eager to humble her. Not long after, another icon, Cheryl Swoops, poured gasoline on the fire. She publicly questioned Clark's college accomplishments, even misstating facts in the process. To many, it didn't sound like fair or objective analysis. It sounded like an attempt to chip away at the very records that had made Clark a household name. In other words, it felt less like commentary and more like a deliberate effort to drag the rising star back down to earth before she could fly too high. When the season officially tipped off, the tension no longer lived in sound bites and interviews. It exploded onto the court in brutal, physical form. Caitlin Clark wasn't just defended aggressively, she was deliberately targeted. The infamous flagrant foul by Kennedy Carter quickly became the defining image of that hostility. Away from the ball, Carter lowered her shoulder and delivered a violent body check that had nothing to do with basketball. It wasn't just a foul, it was a statement. A warning shot from the old guard that Clark's sudden fame, the spotlight she carried, and the money she attracted to the league weren't going to buy her an easy welcome. To many watching, it looked less like competition and more like hazing. Instead of celebrating the rookie who had single-handedly elevated ratings and ticket sales to heights women's basketball had never seen, Clark seemed to be stepping into a league determined to cut her down and remind her of her place. And beneath that resistance ran an even darker current, resentment. Diana Taurasi and Cheryl Swoops stood firmly by their earlier criticisms, almost as if protecting their own legacy. In interviews, they doubled down, framing their sharp words as simple honesty, realism, or tough love. But to countless fans, it didn't feel that way at all. It felt calculated, like a refusal to give credit where it was clearly due. No one had ever denied that Clark would face challenges transitioning to the pros. Yet when the biting critiques collided with the physical targeting on the hardwood, the picture became undeniable. This wasn't just competition. It was a league not fully ready, or perhaps unwilling, to embrace the disruptive change she represented. Behind the scenes, WNBA leadership suddenly found themselves staring down a crisis that felt nothing short of catastrophic. The moment Caitlin Clark was eliminated from the playoffs, the spotlight dimmed almost instantly. Ratings nosedived, ticket sales collapsed, and what should have been the league's proudest stretch, the nationally televised postseason, threatened to become its most humiliating. Picture this: arenas half empty during the finals, cameras capturing rows of vacant seats. That single image alone could have destroyed the fragile narrative the league had worked so hard to protect. That interest was growing beyond Clark. Without her, the illusion cracked. Sponsors would hesitate, TV networks would rethink billion-dollar deals, and the carefully built momentum of the season could unravel overnight. So, in a move many saw as pure desperation, the league scrambled to manufacture an illusion. Ticket prices were slashed to rock-bottom levels. Seats that had once sold for hundreds during Clark's games suddenly went for under $10. Even coveted courtside spots, long symbols of prestige, sat empty until they too were practically given away. The strategy was simple: fill the seats at any cost. On TV, it worked. The cameras panned across what looked like buzzing, full arenas. Commentators raved about electric energy. Viewers at home assumed demand was still booming. But in reality, it was all smoke and mirrors. Those packed crowds weren't diehard fans. They were bargain hunters lured by giveaway prices. What the league presented as a thriving product was, in truth, nothing more than an elaborate stage set. The WNBA wasn't showcasing genuine, organic success. It was masking its failures. The deeper problem remained untouched. The league had yet to prove it could sustain the massive audience Caitlin Clark had brought in. Rather than confronting that uncomfortable reality head-on, officials tried to paper over it with manufactured optics. It was a short-term cover-up for a long-term crisis. The brand stood fragile, propped almost entirely on the shoulders of one rookie phenom, while too many veterans seemed more focused on defending their pride than protecting the league's future. Yet, through all of the chaos, the criticism, the bruising fouls, the empty seats hidden by slashed ticket prices, Clark never lashed out. She didn't fire back at legends who questioned her, nor did she publicly retaliate against players who tried to send messages on the court. Instead, she just kept playing, kept producing, kept building her legacy in silence. And perhaps that, more than anything, revealed the sharpest contrast of all. While others obsessed over politics and pride, she simply let her game do the talking. But as the storm grew louder, one uncomfortable truth became harder to ignore. The fiery clash between Sue Bird and Stephen A. Smith, the hostility from veteran icons, and the desperate maneuvers from the league's front office all pointed toward a single, haunting question. Was the WNBA truly strong, or was it fragile, dangerously dependent on one star to survive? And that leads us straight into an even sharper debate: competitive balance. Could this imbalance be the real threat lurking just beneath the surface? Stay tuned, because Caitlin Clark's meteoric rise has triggered something far bigger than highlight reels or ticket sales. It sparked the WNBA's deepest identity crisis yet. Beneath the noise of on-court battles and heated media debates lies a far more sensitive and uncomfortable truth. Clark's arrival didn't just disrupt the competitive balance of the league, it rattled its cultural and social foundations. For decades, the WNBA was carried and defined largely by black athletes who weren't just chasing trophies. They were pioneers, activists, and trailblazers, fighting for recognition in a world that too often overlooked them. They built the league's identity with sweat, sacrifice, and resilience. Then, almost overnight, Caitlin Clark burst onto the scene. A white rookie from Iowa, she didn't simply enter the WNBA, she transformed it. Her dazzling play combined with a tidal wave of media attention catapulted her into a level of stardom most veterans had never reached, even after years, even decades, of hard work. In just a few months, she became a household name. Sponsors lined up. TV ratings soared. Ticket sales skyrocketed. It was everything the league had been chasing for years. But success came with a shadow. To many players, the issue wasn't Clark herself. It was what her sudden rise symbolized. Why had decades of brilliant black superstars never received this same level of coverage, sponsorship, or mainstream attention? Why did it take the emergence of a white star for the sport to finally capture the spotlight it had long deserved? For some, the answer felt painfully clear. Proof of a deeper societal bias playing out on the WNBA's biggest stage. And that undercurrent of tension made Clark an easy, if unfair, target. The problem was never her undeniable talent, but the inequalities her fame exposed, inequalities the league had never truly confronted. This conflict wasn't simply about jealousy or generational divides. It was tangled in race, representation, and years of pent-up frustration from players who felt overlooked, undervalued, and underappreciated despite carrying the league through its toughest years. Which brings us back to Sue Bird and the contradictions that made her fiery confrontation with Stephen A. Smith so explosive. Here's the strange twist. Sue Bird wasn't always one of Caitlin Clark's critics. In fact, before Clark even stepped onto a WNBA court, Bird was one of her biggest supporters. She praised Clark as a generational talent, celebrated her spotlight on the league, and even said her rise would lift everyone because, in her words, a rising tide lifts all boats. So what changed? Why did Bird, a legend who once welcomed Clark as a gift to the game, suddenly pivot, lashing out at Stephen A. Smith for saying the very thing she herself had acknowledged? The generous reading is that Bird was afraid. Afraid that the WNBA was building its entire future on shaky ground, too dependent on one rookie phenom. She worried that if Clark faltered, or worse, if injuries came, the entire spotlight would collapse with her. Bird wanted the league to be seen as a collection of stars, not a one-woman spectacle. But the harsher interpretation cuts deeper. It wasn't just about the league, it was about legacy. After years of building the WNBA brick by brick, Bird and her generation suddenly had to watch as a 22-year-old rookie seemed to hold the keys to everything they had worked for. By clashing with Stephen A., by pushing back against the narrative that Clark's absence could tank ratings, Bird wasn't only defending the league, she was defending her own place in its history. And yet, the truth was undeniable. Caitlin Clark changed everything. Her games shattered TV records. Her presence filled arenas that had once struggled to sell tickets. She brought in sponsors, headlines, and audiences the league had been chasing for decades. But with that spotlight came something the WNBA wasn't ready for, the cracks it revealed, the resentment from veterans, the questions about identity, and the uncomfortable reality that without Clark, the league might not sustain this wave of attention at all. That is the paradox of Caitlin Clark. At once a blessing and a curse, a solution and a problem. She gave the WNBA the visibility and financial surge it had been chasing for 25 years, but she also exposed its deepest insecurities. And now, the league wasn't just fighting battles on the court. The real fight had moved somewhere much bigger and much more dangerous. It wasn't just the turnstiles spinning faster. The ripple effect of Caitlin Clark's presence touched every corner of the league. Television ratings surged to levels the WNBA had only dreamed of. Merchandise sales exploded, with Clark's jersey outselling not only her peers, but even eclipsing NBA stars at certain points. Social media lit up whenever she played. Clips of her logo-range threes going viral in minutes, pulling in audiences who had never once tuned into a women's basketball game before. Corporate sponsors, long hesitant to invest heavily in the WNBA, suddenly lined up with multi-million-dollar deals. Broadcasters shifted schedules to feature more fever games in prime slots. And networks that once gave women's basketball token coverage now treated it as a ratings anchor. The Clark effect wasn't just hype. It was measurable, undeniable, and historic. Yet with all that success came new questions. Could this momentum last? Was it sustainable for one rookie to carry an entire league on her shoulders? And what did it mean for the veterans who had spent decades grinding for recognition, only to see Clark rewrite the narrative almost overnight? Because while Clark was celebrated as a once-in-a-generation talent, she was also human. Just 22 years old, navigating the spotlight, the pressure, and the weight of expectations not just from fans, but from the very survival of the league itself. And that's where the story takes a darker, more complicated turn. Because behind the sold-out arenas and the record-breaking ratings lurked a fragile truth. The WNBA's newfound success was balancing almost entirely on Caitlin Clark's shoulders. So the question now is simple, but unsettling. What happens if that foundation cracks? Economically, Caitlin Clark has become nothing less than the heartbeat of the WNBA. In 2024 alone, reports showed she was tied to more than a quarter of the league's total business activity, a staggering figure for a single player. Merchandise sales skyrocketed by hundreds of %, with her jersey quickly becoming the hottest item in women's sports. TV broadcasts of her games consistently drew over 1 million viewers, numbers that once felt unimaginable for the league. Off the court, her brand power grew just as fast. From a historic $28 million Nike deal to partnerships with Gatorade and State Farm, Clark didn't just join the endorsement world, she dominated it. Her face is now front and center in campaigns that have pushed women's basketball into mainstream culture like never before. And the timing couldn't be more critical. As the WNBA renegotiates its media rights, Clark's popularity gives executives the leverage to dream of doubling future broadcast deals, potentially reshaping the financial future of the league. But perhaps her greatest legacy won't be measured in contracts or TV ratings. Clark embodies confidence, skill, and ambition in a way that connects deeply with a new generation of fans. Much like Serena Williams redefined tennis, Clark is redefining what women's basketball can be. The Caitlin Clark effect isn't a fad, it's the foundation of a new era. Yet the question remains, as old legends clash with new icons, will this shift unify the league or expose divides too deep to heal? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.